Next, I'd like to introduce Jamie French, and all of you, we're all concerned about development in Collier County, and he's department head for the Growth Management Department. So here's Jamie. I don't know if this will help you.
I'll figure it out. Okay. Thank you, though. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I go by Jamie. It's what my father's name and my grandfather's name was James, and my mother hated the name, so she agreed to allow me to be named Jamie. But my grandfather was Jim. My dad was Jimmy, and so my mother said, "Well, we're gonna call him Jamie." And so I was born at the end of 1969, originally from Davie, Florida. If you ever know anything about Davie. And I moved here when I was 8 years old, so I've been here a while, y'all. But at the end of the day, that was a tough name to grow up with, so I think I've earned it, so I just keep it. And everyone that I grew up with here in Collier County, they still call me Jamie. So I am the department head for Growth Management Community Development. And if anybody's got an opinion about growth, it's me, because my family's been here for better than 40 years, and I've seen both the good, the bad, and I'm just going to say the indifferent, because I am a county employee. And I serve at the pleasure of you. I serve at the pleasure of the county manager. I serve at the discretion of the county manager in my position. So at any given time, Mr. Mudd, Mr. Oakes, Mr. Isaacson, and now Ms. Patterson can say, "Jamie, you're done." And I have no right of appeal. And I value that. I value that because this is the community where I grew up. This is the community where I raised my children. And I can tell you, as everyone's heard the story, especially on affordable housing, because now affordable housing, as of four months ago, I volunteered to take the program because we saw so many problems and how it conflicted with our community. So you're about to see an item with the $20 million that was voted in by the voters on how those dollars will be spent after it's sat on the shelf for over 2 years. A lot of people campaigned for it, but there wasn't a plan in place under the previous administration. And this is not saying anything derogatory about the previous administration, but it all fits. Economic development, that's us too. So I have 7 division directors that I'm responsible for, and they are not my employees, they are my colleagues. They saw me come up through the ranks. You've all heard the story probably about the single parent raising their children and couldn't afford to live here, and they worked 3 jobs and they did everything they could. How many of you have actually lived it? That was me. That was me too. Had custody of my 3 kids, all elementary school age, found myself in Tallahassee, Florida, and I left my career to come home. And at the end of the day, I wouldn't trade it for the world. Now, my kids would probably tell you something different. I can't imagine what my oldest son's children are saying about me. So nonetheless, I want to talk a little bit about this. I'm going to have to jump down because this is an animated screen. Since 2012, this is a wave of growth that we have seen. So every one of those dots represents new construction, where it happened and where it occurred. So just so you know, the red dots are commercial, and the good rule of thumb in development is that commercial will always follow rooftops. So the reason why they didn't build a Publix first is because they don't have clients. And the reason why people drive from the east to the west is to go to the Publix, because that one was already built. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to jump down and kind of show you the map. And so again, this takes a 3-month snapshot from 2012 going forward. You see Ave Maria come on, and you actually see a wave of growth. It's almost like a cloud, right? And so what we saw even during 2019 and 2020, believe it or not, we tracked the activity of where people are moving from. California showed up for the first time at 10.2%, where they beat New York in 2019 and 2020 with a migration, Colorado, Texas. So, you know, the old saying was, "Go west, young man." Well, now they're coming back home, right? So we saw that, and a lot of that had to do clearly with politics, quality of life, open space, but also Florida, by the way, is a minimum code state. So, and the Florida Attorney General has opined all the way back to Bob Butterworth that says, you shall take the law on its face value. So don't go bother to look in the commentary to determine what the lawmakers meant. It's common speak. So, state of Florida follows the Florida Building Code. You can look it up under Chapter 49 or 553. Land use planning is under 163. And so essentially what it does is that the state of Florida states that we value your property rights. And if you have a higher and better use, a thought for that with your property, then you have the right to due process. So you cannot cut them off from saying, I don't want it, just because it's going to change my community. If you think about it, the Haldeman House, think about all the historic structures that have been leveled. Collier County actually sees more demolitions and rebuilds than probably anywhere else in the nation. 10-year-old structures that are perfectly fine, but someone else buys it and they have a better idea. This is the home of my dream, or this is my higher and better use. And this is what they do. So, and our goal here is to accommodate them. So I started the county about 19 years ago. And I remember I was in graduate school, and my graduate advisor said, hey, Jamie, you're an entrepreneur. I was always private sector, never worked for the government. He said, why are you doing this? They're trained to be drones. They are trained to say no. That's all they do. And I can tell you, I grew up here. My uncle was a building official. He was the general contractor on the Ritz-Carlton Beach Club. And at the end of the day, I came here 5 years later, I run into my graduate advisor. He's very wealthy. So of course, I paid for lunch at Applebee's. But nonetheless, I told him, Doc, you were right. He said, so why are you still there? I said, because we're getting a chance to change it. And so what we saw during the recession is that we saw 140 of our finest colleagues go home. So my business, 90% of my budget that I'm responsible for, and we run just under $180 million budget on North Horseshoe and 5 different offices around the county. 90% of our budget is enterprise fund. We do not impact the general fund taxpayer at all. So if we're not in the permitting business, we're not in business. No different than private sector. The other 10% of our budget is made up of code enforcement. And we have just under 30 code enforcement officers for a population year-round of 400,000 people, with a 20% swing in your population just to run code enforcement. And somehow we get it done. So again, I'm very lucky, I'm very blessed to have the colleagues that I have, and we serve proudly. And unfortunately, we've created a culture that, believe it or not, in my entire career, I've never fired someone. They've either left on their own or the culture has actually rejected them. But many of the people that we hire, we've got now people that have left us, that have gone on to both state and federal assignments because of the training they've received here and the way we look at business as partners and the community as a partner, and we balance that need. We're not paid to have an opinion. We don't set policy. We follow the law, and we're a minimum code state. So overreaching and activism, it really has no place with us. And hopefully we're serving you well. I'm just going to advance this. And I probably messed it up here. Okay, so Collier County population growth from 1950. And this is based off U.S. Census data. And so so of the 7 divisions that we have, we also do we are the local authority having jurisdiction for many things, to include working with the Census Bureau every 10 years. And so our permitting software, what we use, it's a product called CityView, Harris Computer Corporation. We've designed it to meet our own. It's very front-facing. So if you ever wanted to know what was going on with something in your community, project name, owner name, folio number, address, it's all front-facing and it's all in real time. Code enforcement complaint, licensing complaint, but also new construction. So this is our actual population growth of year-round citizens, all the way to, and now again, this is forecasted in the future using the University of Florida Bureau of Economic and Business Research. So this is their forecast. It is not a static line. It's dynamic in nature based off market demand and also on conditions of home prices or the cost of money. So this is what we show all the way out to 2050 at a population of just over 500,000 people. Golden Gate Estates, where we've seen a number of folks actually live for a number of years, but also what we're seeing is that we're seeing a migratory pattern of those that were now west of Goodlet Road or west of Airport Road starting to move out there for the open space. It also creates a great deal of congestion, great deal of traffic, but also it creates instant demand for schools. It creates instant demand for our sheriff's office, for EMS, for fire, because we have an obligation to serve. What we have out there is currently of the 20, and this is all east of 951 Collier Boulevard, about 24,000 buildable lots. There's just about 9,000 left. That's how fast we are growing, and most of the activity we're seeing, hopefully as demonstrated on that last slide, showed the wave of movement out to the east.
Could you just repeat those numbers?
So of the
First about the number of lots that were available and what's left.
just about 9,000 is what's left to be built. And those are predominantly infill lots. This does not include your rural land stewardship area. This does not include the villages. This does not include anything you're seeing come forward with the entitlements that the board are giving consideration to. So that are just those estates lots. Now that is not out in what we would call in the South blocks, as I knew them as a kid, because all of that land is now in conservation. And that would be everything south of I-75, all the way to US 41. So how do we track our future movement? These are all great lagging indicators, but how do we look in the future and how do we track as far as knowing that we run a 90-10 budget where we rely on permitting dollars to keep folks employed? It's a heavy balance. And so essentially we track those by plats, because what a plat is predominantly, and you can see the activity over the years, 2019, 2020, those are record number plats. This is pretty much what a plat looks like. That's when a developer is ready. They're actually ready to put in infrastructure, ready to put in streets, ready to put in sidewalks, and yes, go vertical and actually start to build businesses and homes. So on average, we run somewhere between 2 to 3 plats. The last 2 months, we've run 0. So why? Cost of money, cost of property, cost of employees. So we are starting to see a slowdown. Now it could just be a pause. And that could be for inflationary purposes, or it could very well be for affordable housing, or could be a hurricane, where the need for construction is higher in demand in Lee County and Charlotte County, but believe it or not, Orange County. Orange County took a lot of damage off of Hurricane Ian. So right now, next month, we've got 2 plats coming in, but they're very small. But this talks about our future, and this is how we balance it, no different than any other business. I don't charge anybody anything. The Board of County Commissioners does. And I'm not a politician. Impact fees are charged to the land. So based off of the use, and that calculation is based off of best available data against the actual what the law allows for. So there's got to be a rational nexus. The impact fee program, it is reevaluated every 3 years. Unfortunately, the impact fees you pay today, if you followed it like almost a consumer price index, it doesn't keep up, because it looks at what the prices are today. It doesn't look to what the prices would be in the future, and it's locked in for 3 years. So what we saw during that 19 and 20 boom, if you look at the cost of material, so OSB, which is plywood, OSB was running about $16 a sheet. We saw it jump up to almost $70 a sheet. Now, why was that? Hurricane Michael came along. They don't cut when it's wet. And when you have trees that are leaning, they're not hardly even good for mulch. Plus COVID, they shut down the factories. So they're no longer running 24 hours. So your cost of materials. And also you had competing interests. You had you had Great Britain, you had Australia, you had New Zealand. They started to benefit from the federal government level to re-spark their economy for building. And so now we're competing for fasteners, for nails, for screws, because they're not manufactured all in the United States. And so we're competing so it's now, construction is a very global market when it comes to commodities. And so that's a plat. This is our COs. COs issued by year. And if you look at those 2 years, I believe that is 19 and 20, Collier County had the highest number of permits issued in those years in the history of Collier County. Over 60,000 permits were issued in each one of those years. So the volume is incredible and the staffing levels are challenging. We typically run somewhere about a 12 to 14% of vacancy, just simply because the licensing, the qualifications to hold our positions. So what happens is that we find ways to modify our culture if you've got somebody that's coming from Hendry County. Our goal here is as long as they work their 40 hours, that's what we want. But if they're not a frontline employee and they can't get here till 9, it's okay to work till 6. In fact, we've got employees that come in at 4 o'clock in the morning and sometimes leave at 2. And that's okay too. We will make those adjustments in order to get the work done because this isn't something I can train for. This is a licensed, skilled professional that was a practitioner that now most of our staff is well over 50, older than me, believe it or not, because what they've done, their bodies have wore out and they're tired of competing for the dollar as a contractor or as an engineer, and they're coming to the county then for that 40-hour week, that government. But they bring a monster load of resources and wealth of knowledge and licensing and provide us with additional qualifications so that when we sit down with a client, we can get them through the process the first time. That's our goal. And by the way, every time you have to resubmit with Collier County, we don't charge any additional money. So it's actually better for us to get you through the first time so that way I can go tend to the work that's already lined up. And by the way, the state of Florida also puts a time limit on how long we can take. So our average turnaround time for Hurricane Irma victims is 2 days to get your permit out. And we're still averaging 300 permits per day. So again, I'm awfully proud of what we do. I don't take any credit for it. Clearly, I'm just lucky to have some really good folks that I get to work with and in a community where I grew up. And I certainly appreciate y'all having me. And if there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. We're just right off of Horseshoe Drive. And as Crystal will tell you, I'm normally there from about 8:30, 9 o'clock till 9:30, 10. So and my good rule of thumb is if the dog hasn't released herself, sorry, if she can hold it, I've got her up to 14 hours now. So, but I do feel bad, but it would be totally my fault.